Sawadee-kap, hello and welcome to Daily Wisdom, Walking the Path with the Buddha. Today is our Pali Canon and English study group, and we're in volume 11, which is titled The Realms of Existence. We're going to be exploring chapters 111 through 120 today. The way that we do this program is I invite students in Zoom to be able to volunteer to read one of the chapters or multiple chapters if you like. And then after a student reads a chapter, then I will share some teachings on that particular chapter, and then we open up to any and all questions that you guys might have, whether you're in Facebook, YouTube, or Zoom. You can ask questions related to the chapter that we're studying. So where other programs that do kind of more of a traditional style of learning, where I'm actually teaching and then opening up to questions and teaching and open up for questions, this is more of a study group. So welcome to all of you, whether you're joining for the first time or you're joining regularly. You could actually read these chapters ahead of time from downloading the books from our website by going to buddhadailywisdom.com. But if you haven't done that, it's okay, because you can actually study right along with us in our class today. So if there's anybody who's in Zoom that would like to volunteer to read this first chapter, 111, you're more than welcome to. Okay, it looks like a bunch of people. It looks like Vibhav was first, and then Samantha will come to you for the next one. Go ahead, Vibhav.
At the mother's milk, months, the cycle of rebirth is without discoverable beginning. The first point is not identifiable of beings roaming and wandering on, hindered by ignorance, unknowing of true reality, and fettered by craving. What do you think, monks? Which is more, the mother's milk that you have drunk as you roamed and wandered us through this long course, this or the water in the four great oceans? As we understand the teachings taught by the perfectly enlightened one, Venerable Sir, the mother's milk that we have drunk as we roamed and wandered on through this long course, this alone is more than the water in the four great oceans. Good, monks. It is good that you understand the teachings taught by me in such a way. The mother's milk that you have drunk as you roamed and wandered through this long course, this alone is more than the water in the four great oceans. For what reason? Because, monks, the cycle of rebirth is without discoverable beginning. Our first point is not identifiable of beings roaming and wandering on, hindered by ignorance, unknowing of true reality, and fettered by craving. For such a long time, monks, you have experienced discontentedness, misery, and disaster, and swell the cemetery. It is enough to experience fading away of strong feelings towards all conditions, enough to become free from strong feelings towards them, enough to be liberated by them, from them. Thank you.
Okay, thank you, Vibhav. So here we have another chapter similar to some of the ones we were reading last week, where the Buddha is explaining how the beginning of the cycle of rebirth is undiscoverable, meaning you can't know when or necessarily even how it began, because none of us were actually there, right? So we can't independently verify it. So if the Buddha actually taught this, then we would just have to believe it, because we wouldn't be able to independently verify how it actually occurred. The way that a Buddha teaches is they teach teachings that are independently verifiable. So here, the beginning of the cycle of rebirth, when that occurred and how that occurred, it's undiscoverable. And you don't actually even need to know that in order to be able to get to enlightenment. Sometimes the mind has a craving and a longing, a yearning to know what happened in the past. You know, we know from science that the Earth has been here for about 4.5 billion years. That's our best estimate now, and kind of what most people agree to. But whether that's true or false, we don't know. The next discovery right around the corner could completely change that, right? And that's just our Earth. That doesn't account for the other aspects of the world, right? We have the solar system and galaxies and all these different things beyond that. So we really can't truly understand. And the Buddha is teaching you this as a way to help your mind to be able to just let go and realize that you don't need to know this information in order to get to enlightenment. Because the ultimate goal is to train your mind and get to that peace and joy, elimination of discontent feelings. And it's not contingent upon knowing this information. If we did know what was the beginning of the cycle of rebirth in terms of a date or how it happened, okay, that's fine. At the end of the day, you still have pollutions in your mind. You still need to eliminate them and uproot them. And that's what the Buddha is really focusing students on. So here, this is a way of helping you to understand that if you have any kind of longing or yearning to know that information, you can't figure that out, and focus today what actually you can do to be able to eliminate the pollutions of mind and actually get to enlightenment. One of the other things that you can glean from a discourse like this is to understand the countless rebirths that have occurred prior to this one. that what he's saying is that the milk that we've drank in from our mother and all these previous existences is more water than all the water in all the seas. During his lifetime, they were aware of the 4 great oceans, where today we think about 5 large seas or great oceans. So during his lifetime, he understood about 4, but we can basically understand this to be all the water in all the seas. And if you've done any kind of scuba diving or anything like this, you know there's a massive amount of water in the world, right? So this is how the Buddha is using an analogy to help you to be able to see you've had countless rebirths. And the reason why is that the mind is hindered by this ignorance or this unknowing of true reality, this lack of wisdom. So the mind, because of its lack of wisdom, continues to be fettered by craving. And because of the craving, the longing, the yearning, that's where the anger and the frustration is arising. So therefore, beings are continuing to roam and wander all throughout the cycle of rebirth. And the way that you put an end to this is you arise wisdom, because this ignorance is the first cause and condition that is leading to the roaming and wandering. So if you arise wisdom of how to train your mind and eliminate the craving, that's what's going to eliminate this roaming and wandering. In fact, you might even think about this back maybe prior to getting onto the path to enlightenment, about how we might have just been roaming around the world, kind of going from one thing to the next, one job to the next, one house to the next in terms of where we live, chasing after money, doing this, doing that. We maybe didn't really have a true purpose in the world of what it was that we were working towards and what we were trying to accomplish. We're just kind of roaming and wandering, kind of like going to the mall and not really having any kind of plan and just roaming and wandering, which I actually enjoy, roaming and wandering around the mall sometimes, right? That's kind of nice to just not really have a plan and just walk around, sure. But when it's talking about the cycle of rebirth and continuing to experience discontentedness over and over and over again, that's not something that you're interested in roaming and wandering through. So the Buddha is helping you to be able to see that there's these countless rebirths, and that the mind can oftentimes be focused on what is the beginning of this whole process. Why are we here? Sometimes people ask that. What's the purpose to our life? People oftentimes have this longing, yearning to understand this kind of information. And the Buddha is saying, hey, it's enough just to get to enlightenment. That's what this last sentence is all about, is like, hey, you don't need to know what the beginning was, that it's enough to just get liberated from these strong feelings where you can experience enlightenment. If you get to that, it won't matter what happened before. You'll just be so peaceful and so joyful. So if your mind has a longing, yearning to know the beginning, the Buddha is helping you to be able to see that that's undiscoverable. And now you can just train your mind to let that go and focus on what really matters in this life, which is training your mind to uproot the pollutions and actually get to enlightenment. So let me know what questions you guys have here on this chapter. You can put these into Facebook, YouTube, or Zoom, or you can raise your hand in Zoom and ask any questions that you like. So it looks like Vibhav has a question. Go ahead, sir.
David, I was wondering whether the analogy of there's like drinking a mother's milk is more than the 4 great oceans, like this analogy or other analogies like this. Is it like to be taken literally or figuratively, that you drank more mother's milk than the water in the 4 great oceans, because there's a massive amount of water for the 4 great oceans?
Yeah, it's literal, actually. So you shouldn't try to read into any of the teachings of the Buddha. If he's saying this, that's what he means. He's not, just saying something that is not actually true. If he's going to speak this and he's going to use this analogy, it's actually true. Because if you think about the earth itself being here, let's just say that it's been here for 4.5 billion years. Billion, right? We can't even imagine. Sometimes people think about the life of the Buddha being 2,500 years ago, and they think like, oh my goodness, that was so long ago. But in terms of the history of the earth, that's like a blink of an eye, 2,500 years ago. So if we go back to when beings were first kind of on this earth and this planet, all the different animals, all those rebirths and all those different things just over and over and over again for billions of years. It's very easy to see how it's possible that one has drank this much milk as the water in all of the seas. So a Buddha is not going to use an analogy that is untrue, because that would be speaking of falsehood. if a Buddha is going to speak, they're going to speak the truth. So no need to read into this or think that he's just kind of saying something that's not true, that you can know that whenever you see him speak about this type of thing or anything else, it's the truth, and no need to think beyond that. Mm-hmm. Okay. I don't see any other questions anywhere. So let's go to the next one. And Samantha was interested in reading. So Samantha, if you'd like to read this one, that'd be great.
Thank you, Teacher David. In misfortune, in misery, in this long course. Monks, the cycle of rebirth is without discoverable beginning. A first point is not identifiable of beings roaming and wandering on, hindered by ignorance and fettered by craving. Whenever you see anyone in misfortune, in misery, you can conclude, we too have experienced the same thing in this long course. For what reason? Because, monks, the cycle of rebirth is without discoverable beginning. A first point is not identifiable of beings roaming and wandering on, hindered by ignorance and fettered by craving. For such a long time, monks, you have experienced discontentedness, misery, and disaster, and swelled the cemetery. It is enough to experience fading away of strong feelings towards all conditions, enough to become free from strong feelings towards them, enough to be liberated from them.
Okay, thank you, Samantha. So this is a similar discourse as before, but there's another purpose of how you can use this discourse. So of course, the Buddha is teaching that the beginning of the cycle of rebirth is undiscoverable, and that there's been these countless rebirths. We're getting that through a whole series of discourses here, that there's not a discoverable beginning, and to focus on getting to enlightenment, right? That's what he's actually saying here in this particular discourse. But he's saying something different and unique that we haven't seen in our previous discourses that we've been studying, where he's saying whenever you see anyone in misfortune or in misery, you can conclude that you too have experienced that at some point in your whole series of rebirths over and over and over again. What this helps you to do is arise loving kindness and compassion in your mind. Because someone who doesn't have loving kindness and compassion in their mind, they might see somebody experiencing certain misfortunes or misery, and they might experience indifference with that. Let's just say someone was homeless or addicted to drugs and alcohol, or having famine or poverty or something like this. Someone might look at that situation and be like, I don't care. It's not my friends, it's not my family, right? That's kind of indifference. Or someone might be like, that's their karma, who cares, right? Or someone might be all the way on the other side where they have anxiety and worry about these kinds of things. And what you would like to do is arise loving kindness and compassion. We were talking about this last week with the Brahma Viharas and how these healthy mental states are helping to antidote specific aspects of the mind. So when you see somebody that's having misfortune, one of the ways to help your mind cultivate loving kindness or a genuine interest in seeing all beings be well, active goodwill towards all beings, is think of that person as yourself, that you have actually experienced that exact same thing. And maybe you're in a different place in your life right now than that, but you can conclude that you've experienced that same misfortune. So if you see someone that's homeless or struggling with drugs and alcohol, it might not have been in this life that you experienced that, but the Buddha is saying in some previous life that you've experienced that. And now that can help you to arise this loving kindness and the compassion. Compassion is the concern for the misfortune of others. Now, whether you choose to act upon that or not is a choice for you to make. And each situation is going to be different. You're not going to have just one stock answer because the variables are different in each situation. But you need to at least maintain the mental state of loving kindness and compassion among others, because that's what's going to keep the mind bright and uplifted among other healthy and wholesome mental states. But this is going to help keep the mind in the middle, because say with compassion, if you're on one side where you're indifferent, or the other side where you're worried and having anxiety, your mind can't be peaceful. It's not liberated. It's not free. So you can come to the middle where you have concern for the misfortune of others. And this discourse helps you to be able to see that if you've truly experienced all these countless rebirths, which the Buddha is saying that you have, then you can conclude that, okay, that misfortune that person's having, I've experienced that same thing. And not only can it help you with loving kindness and compassion, it can help you with conceit and judgment. Because sometimes if you see somebody struggling in life, you're at a different place in your whole cycle of rebirth, you're at a different place than them, you might look down on them in a negative way and start judging them and thinking that you're so great and above them. But just put yourself in those people's shoes, and that can help you arise loving kindness, compassion, get rid of conceit, and not be judgmental towards this individual who's having a certain misfortune. So that's how you can use a discourse like this, in addition to the way we've talked about using it to not focus on the beginning of the cycle of rebirth. So any questions here on this particular discourse? You remember, you can put those into Facebook, YouTube, or in Zoom. Okay, I'm not seeing any questions. So we've got this next chapter, 113. Is there someone who would like to read this one? Okay, it looks like Samantha's volunteering again. Go ahead, ma'am.
Okay. In happiness, in fortune, in this long course. Monks, this cycle of rebirth is without discoverable beginning. A first point is not identifiable of beings roaming and wandering on, hindered by ignorance and fettered by craving. Whenever you see anyone happy and fortunate, you can conclude, we too have experienced the same thing in this long course. For what reason? Because, monks, the cycle of rebirth is without discoverable beginning. A first point is not identifiable of beings roaming and wandering on, hindered by ignorance and fettered by craving. For such a long time, monks, you have experienced discontentedness, misery, and disaster, and swelled the cemetery. It is enough to experience fading away of strong feelings towards all conditions, enough to become free from feeling strong feelings towards them, enough to be liberated from them.
Okay, thank you, ma'am. So this discourse is similar to the previous one, except it's looking at the other side of this, that not only have you experienced the same misfortunes that you see other people experiencing, but the same fortunate things that you see people experiencing, you've experienced those things too. And where this comes in is it helps you to arise sympathetic joy, and it can also arise some equanimity too. Because let's just say you see somebody who's rich and famous, and you're like, oh, I want that so bad. Maybe the mind's jealous about that, right? Well, you can understand, well, no, I've already experienced that. At some point in the past, in this long cycle of rebirth, you've already been rich and famous, right? So you don't need to long and yearn and crave for it. So your mind can experience some sympathetic joy, where sympathetic joy is joy for others' success, even if you didn't contribute to it. That helps you eliminate envy and jealousy. So wherever you see envy and jealousy arising in the mind, you apply right effort to bring in the sympathetic joy. And then by eliminating the craving, desire, attachment for that particular situation, now your mind can arise some equanimity, where there's some more calmness and composure in the mind. Because when your mind has this longing, yearning, and it's pulling in all these different directions, and it has this discontentedness like envy and jealousy in the mind, it's not going to have equanimity. It's going to be shaken up in those situations. So if you see somebody experiencing some fortunate situation that you think is fortunate, maybe they're going on a holiday, vacation somewhere, maybe, who knows, maybe you really want to have children, and maybe you can't have children. And now you've decided that you're not going to adopt, you're not going to do any of that stuff. And maybe you see someone with children and maybe you're a little bit jealous or envious, right? Or you see someone get a big brand new house and you're living in a smaller house. Whenever you see that, you can be like, I've already done that, right? So you can train your mind to let go of any craving and longing, yearning for the things that you see other people experiencing. Because what you ultimately need to get to on this path to enlightenment is that whatever life that you put together through all the decisions that you're making, that you're completely content and peaceful with that life, in terms of where you're living, in terms of the type of friends that you have, in terms of the job or occupation that you have, all the different things that you're experiencing in life. By the time you get to enlightenment, you will be completely fulfilled, completely satisfied. There's not going to be anything that's missing from your life. Whereas if your mind is longing, yearning for things that other people are experiencing that you consider to be fortunate, your mind's not completely peaceful and content in the present moment, because it's still longing, yearning for something that it doesn't have. So you need to get to the point where you make a series of decisions for multiple years that you construct the ideal life for yourself of where you're living, what job and occupation you have, what types of friends you have, and where you spend time, and all these different things. You would like to be very stable and steady and completely secure, satisfied and fulfilled in whatever life that you've put together. And this type of discourse can help you to do that. Because where you see your mind longing, yearning for something that someone else has, you can just remind yourself, I've already had that, right? And that help your mind to potentially let go. And of course, you need breathing mindfulness meditation and generosity and all the other teachings that the Buddha shared. You can't just think about this discourse, but this kind of helps you to lean in that direction with all the other training that the Buddha teaches you to be able to train your mind to let go of any potential longing, yearning that it might have for fortunate situations. So let me know what questions you guys have here on this chapter. Okay, no questions. All right, we're just moving right on through here. Chapter 14 or 114. Would someone like to read this? Okay, it's the Vibhav and Samantha show.
The stream of blood. Monks, the cycle of rebirth is without discoverable beginning. The first point is not identifiable of beings roaming and wandering on, hindered by ignorance, unknowing of true reality, and fettered by craving. What do you think, monks? Which is more, the stream of blood that you have shed when you were beheaded as you roamed and wandered on through this long course? This or the water in the four great oceans? As we understand the teachings taught by the perfectly enlightened one, Venerable Sir, the stream of blood that we have shed when our heads were cut off as we roamed and wandered on through this long course, this alone is more than the water in the four great oceans. Good, monks. It is good that you understand the teachings taught me by me in such a way. The stream of blood that you have shed as you have roamed around and wandered on through this long course, this alone is more than the water in the four great oceans. For a long time, monks, you have been cows, and when as cows you were beheaded, the stream of blood that you shed is greater than the waters in the four great oceans. For as long that time you have been buffalo, sheep, goats, deer, chickens, and pigs, you were beheaded. The stream of blood that you shed is greater than the waters in the four great oceans. For as long as you have been arrested as burglars, highwaymen, and adulterers, and when you were beheaded, the stream of blood that you have shed is greater than the water in the four great oceans. For what reason? Because, monks, the cycle of rebirth is without discoverable beginning. The first point is not identifiable of being roaming and wandering on, hindered by ignorance, unknowing of true reality, and fettered by craving. For such a long time, monks, you have experienced discontentedness, misery, and disaster, and swelled the cemetery. It is enough to experience fading away from strong feelings towards all conditions, enough to become free from strong feelings towards them, enough to be liberated by them. Thank you.
Okay, thank you, Vibhav. So this is just another analogy, another simile to help you understand the same exact point that the Buddha's been making in this whole series of discourses. Remember, the Buddha is giving these discourses at all different times during his teaching career because he taught from the age of 35 to 80. So while in this book series, you're seeing them one after another because they've been assembled that way. So you get a very clear picture of what the Buddha is teaching. He might have said one, 5-10 years away from the other one, right? And they would have been shared at different settings, depending on where he's at, maybe different villages or different places that he was teaching. So this has been assembled to be able to help you see very clearly that the Buddha is teaching that there is no discoverable beginning to the cycle of rebirth, that you've had countless rebirths over and over and over again, and a focus on getting to enlightenment. That's the actual focus. You can also see here, because I share many times, that we've all had countless animal existences, and many of us are coming out of the animal realm. And you can see the Buddha talking about this here too. And remember, all of his teachings are independently verifiable. So if you haven't verified the cycle of rebirth, that's okay. That might be where you're at today. But over time, if you start having vivid memories of these kinds of things, then you'll understand why, right? Because you might actually start having these vivid memories of being in some of these animal existences or in human existences. And as you're lifting out that pollution and you start having those memories, you can just understand that that's normal and you don't have to be shaken up by that or concerned or worried about that whatsoever. So the Buddha is helping you to be able to see very clearly what has been experienced because he knows what has been experienced, but then you're not interested in believing that. You just understand that that's the case And then at some point in the future, should you ever have some direct experiences where you're starting to have memories like this, then you understand what it's coming from, that it's coming from these memories from past lives. And you might just see countless existences in the animal realm, because that's what pretty much all of us have experienced at some time. Because once you're in the animal realm, it's very hard to get back out. You need to experience countless rebirths to get back out of the animal realm. So anybody who's been in the animal realm would have experienced countless existences there. So let me know what questions, if any, that you might have on this particular chapter. This is chapter 114. You can put your questions into Facebook, YouTube, or Zoom, or you can raise your hand in Zoom and ask any questions that you like. Okay, I'm not seeing any questions, so we'll just move on here to the next one, chapter 115. There's someone who would like to read this one? Okay, Robert, go ahead, sir.
Beings roaming and wandering on from this world to the other world, and from the other world to this world. Monks, the cycle of rebirth is without discoverable beginning. A first point is not identifiable of beings roaming and wandering on, hindered by ignorance, unknowing of true reality, and fettered by craving. Just as a stick thrown up into the air falls now on its bottom, now on its side, and now on its top, so too as beings roam and wander on, hindered by ignorance, unknowing of true reality, and fettered by craving. Now they go from this world to the other world. Now they come from the other world to this world. For what reason? Because, monks, this cycle of rebirth is without discoverable beginning. A first point is not identifiable of beings roaming and wandering on, hindered by ignorance, unknowing of true reality, and fettered by craving. For such a long time, monks, you have experienced discontentedness, misery, and disaster, and swelled the cemetery. It is enough to experience fading away of strong feelings towards all conditions, enough to become free from strong feelings toward them, enough to be liberated from them.
Okay, thank you, sir. So here, another discourse, again, pointing to the exact same things, just using a different analogy here with this stick. He's helping you to not only be able to see there's no discoverable beginning and there's been countless rebirths, and that the mind's been hindered by this ignorance or unknowing of true reality and fettered by the craving, but he's talking about how beings move in and out of all these realms, right? That sometimes people think that, it's kind of like a serial progression of just gradually moving up, but that's not the case. Beings are actually bouncing around from realm to realm to realm. Sometimes people think once you get to the human or heavenly realm, you're not going to be reborn back to the lower realms. That's untrue. It's only true for someone who's gotten to the stages of enlightenment, for example. So he's using this analogy of the stick. If you've ever been a kid and you've thrown a stick up in the air and kept throwing it up in the air and see how it comes down, you see it comes down different ways each time. And it's the same thing here, that an individual can be reborn into all these different worlds. There's not like a serial progression. You can actually be reborn from hell straight into the heavenly realm. It's very rare, but the Buddha does talk about how this is possible. Same thing from the animal realm or the afflicted spirit realm. You can be reborn into the heavenly realm. Again, very rare, but it can happen. And then beings from the heavenly realm can be reborn down into the lower realms as well. And same thing with humans. We can be reborn in any number of these different realms. It's only when you get to the first, second, third stage of enlightenment that there's a specific rebirth that you're going to experience that doesn't include the lower realms, that it'll be the human realm or the heavenly realm, depending on if you're in the first or second stage of enlightenment, which means you'll come back to the human realm, or the third stage, which is being reborn in the heavenly realm. But remember, the teachings of the Buddha aren't about rebirth. It's about getting to enlightenment and getting to the point where you've escaped this whole cycle of rebirth. Being in the heavenly realm is not the ideal existence. You would like to use this human existence to train your mind and move beyond the causes and conditions that are producing discontentedness, but also the causes and conditions that are producing rebirth. It's the same thing. So this is where I think about the teachings here. It's like a 2-for-1 special. And I know that kind of sounds a little bit cheesy, relating it to the teachings of the Buddha, but that's essentially what it is, right? If you focus on eliminating craving, anger, and ignorance, you get rid of these cravings that are producing discontentedness. Not only have you gotten rid of discontentedness, which was the ultimate goal, but you've gotten rid of this other thing, which is rebirth. So it's a 2-for-1 special. You focus on one thing and you're getting these two benefits, and you'll be able to independently verify that this is what's occurring as you're gradually progressing towards it. So let me know what questions you guys have here. Remember, you can put that into Facebook, YouTube, or in Zoom. Okay, I don't see any questions anywhere. So now we'll move to chapter 116. So now we're going to move into some other types of teachings. Anybody would like to read this one? Okay, Vibhav, go ahead, sir.
So impermanent, so unstable, so unreliable conditions. Monks, the cycle of rebirth is without discoverable beginning. A first point is not identifiable of beings roaming and wandering on, hindered by ignorance, unknowing of true reality, and fettered by craving. In the past monks, this Mount Vipula was called Pachinavas Vamsa, and at this time, these people were called Tevaras. The lifespan of the Tevaras was 40,000 years. They would climb Mount Pachinavamsa in 4 days and descend in 4 days. At that time, the perfectly enlightened one, Kakusantha and Arahant, a perfectly enlightened one, had arisen in the world. His two chief disciples were named Vidura and Sanjeev, an excellent pair. See, monks, that name for this mountain has disappeared. Those people have died, and that fortunate one has attained final nibbana, final enlightenment. So impermanent are conditions, monks, so unstable, so unreliable. It is enough, monks, to experience fading away from strong feelings towards all conditions, enough to become free from strong feelings towards them, enough to be liberated from them. At another time in the past, monks, this Mount Vipula was called Venkaka, and at that time these people were called Rohitasas. The lifespan of the Rohitasas was 30,000 years. They could climb Mount Venkaka in 3 days and descend in 3 days. At that time, the perfectly enlightened one, Kona Gamana and Arahant, a perfectly enlightened one, had arisen in the world. His two chief disciples were named Byosa and Uttara, an excellent pair. See, monks, that name of this mountain has disappeared. Those people have died, and that fortunate one has attained final nibbana, final enlightenment. So impermanent are conditions, monks, so unstable, so unreliable. It is enough, monks, to experience fading away of strong feelings towards all conditions, enough to become free from strong feelings towards them, enough to be liberated from them. At still another time in the past, monks, this Mount Vipula was called Supasa. At the time, these people were called Supiyas. The lifespan of the Supiyas was 20,000 years. They could climb Mount Supasa in 2 days and descend in 2 days. At that time, the perfectly enlightened one, Kasapa and Arahant, a perfectly enlightened one, had arisen in the world. His two chief disciples were named Tissa and Bharadwaj, and an excellent pair. See, monks, that name of this mountain has disappeared. Those people have died, and that fortunate one has attained final nibbana, final enlightenment. So impermanent are conditions, monks, so unstable, so unreliable. It is enough, monks, to experience fading away of strong feelings towards all conditions, enough to become free from strong feelings towards them, enough to be liberated from them. At present, monks, this Mount Vipula is called Vipula. And at present, these people are called Magadhans. The lifespan of the Magadhans is short, limited, fleeting. One who long lives 100 years for a little more. The Magadhans are climb Mount Vipula in an hour and descend in an hour. At present, I have arisen in the world, an Arahant, a perfectly enlightened one. My two chief disciples are named Sariputta and Moggallana, an excellent pair. There will come a time, monks, when the name for this mountain will have disappeared, when these people will have died, and I will have attained final nibbana, final enlightenment. So impermanent are conditions, monks, so unstable, so unreliable. It is enough, monks, to experience fading away of strong feelings towards all conditions, enough to become free from strong feelings towards them, enough to be liberated from them. This is what the perfectly enlightened one said. Having said this, the fortunate one, the teacher, further said this. This was called Pachinavamsa by the Tevaras, and Venkaka by the Rohitasas, Supasa by Supiya people, Vipula by the Magadhan folk. Impermanent are conditions, subject to rising and vanishing. Having arisen, they are eliminated. Their calming is peaceful. Thank you.
Okay, thank you, Vibhav. So a discourse like this is getting to the heart of essentially sharing how all these things around us are impermanent, because that's the very first teaching of the Buddha, to understand the universal truth of impermanence. Because ultimately what you get to with the Four Noble Truths is how the mind craves permanence. So you need to be able to see that everything around you is impermanent. So if you guys have been in a class with me where I've taught the Four Noble Truths, you've seen me go through where I kind of guide you to look at the body, the physical body, your relationships, your bank account, the weather, and all these different things, the sidewalk, the painting of a fence. And I kind of show you how all these things are impermanent. Here, the Buddha is using this mountain as a way to help his students to be able to see that the things around them are impermanent. Now here, the Buddha is talking about people having lifespans far beyond what we can imagine, talking about climbing this mountain, because it sounds like this mountain was getting smaller and smaller and smaller, because that's impermanence as well. We can't confirm whether people actually had lifespans of this amount of time. I suspect that that isn't true, but it really doesn't matter, because the heart of this discourse is helping you to understand the universal truth of impermanence, and that's something that you can independently verify. Whether these other parts are actually true or not doesn't actually matter. In the way that the Pali Canon is compiled, is we know that the Buddha taught 2,500 years ago. Whatever he taught surely led to enlightenment, because today people are using his teachings to be able to get to enlightenment. So we know that what he taught 2,500 years ago definitely led to enlightenment. And over the course of that 2,500 years, we know because of impermanence that this Pali Canon, this source teachings that we have, not everything in the Pali Canon is from the Buddha. And we know that not everything the Buddha taught is in the Pali Canon. It would be very naive of us to think that everything the Buddha taught is in the Pali Canon, because we can see where he references certain things and it's just not in the Pali Canon. So we know that he taught, for example, loving kindness meditation. But exactly how he taught loving kindness meditation, we don't have that in the Pali Canon. But the way that you are able to break through this is that if you have a teacher that doesn't have any anger or frustration or irritation or even the slightest annoyance, whatever they're doing for loving kindness meditation, it led to them eliminating that unwholesome quality of anger, hatred, and all the lesser versions. So you know that it'll work for them, it'll work for you too. So we know that the Buddha taught loving kindness meditation, for example, but exactly what he did, we don't have it in the Pali Canon. We know that he taught walking meditation, because we can see references to it in the Pali Canon, but exactly how he instructed people to do it, we don't have it. But again, if you have a teacher who's done it, used it, they've maybe even enlightened or close to it, then you know that whatever they've done, it's worked for them, so it's going to work for you too. So there's certain things like this that are in the Pali Canon that are really irrelevant. Sometimes when people look at a document that's so old like this, it either has to all be 100% accurate for them to give it any weight, or they just kind of toss it out and be like, we can't pay attention to this. This isn't the best way to look at documents. It's best to be able to understand that there's been a lot of impermanence here, and the way to break through that impermanence is to be able to not believe anything that it is that you're studying whenever you're studying the Pali Canon. That you learn it, investigate it, examine it, that you reflect on it to independently verify it, and then you practice it to be able to see what is true. So at the heart of this discourse is the Buddha talking about impermanence. And that's something that you can absolutely verify. And these things that you can't verify, if it's not possible to verify it, then it's really not needed, right? Because we don't need to know how long somebody lived in the past in order to be able to get to enlightenment today. So this is the Buddha helping his students to be able to understand the universal truth of impermanence. And whether he even spoke this entire discourse or not, we don't really know 100%. But we know that the universal truth of impermanence is 100% true. Because in here, he's actually talking about previous Buddhas. And this is one of the conflicts that I've actually seen in the Pali Canon, that you'll find some places where he's talking about previous Buddhas having existed, but you also see a discourse where he talks about he's the originator, the discoverer, the declarer of the path to enlightenment, undeclared before him, which means there wasn't any Buddhas before him. So you'll see these kind of very minor things like this, but you shouldn't throw out the baby with the bathwater kind of thing, right? So you need to be able to penetrate through that, and that's where guidance from a teacher is helpful to be able to do that. that you understand that there's a core central teaching here in this discourse, which is impermanence. And that's what's important to focus on. And of course, he's talking about the cycle of rebirth as well, but we've already explored that. So let me know what questions you guys have here on this chapter. You can put that into Facebook, YouTube, or Zoom, or you can raise your hand in Zoom if you'd like. It looks like Vibhav, you have your hand up still, or you have a question?
Yeah, I had a question around the same lines that about the previous Buddhas that I mentioned here. There's also some suggestion of, the way I see it is some permanence, that every previously enlightened Buddha had like 2 chief disciples. So there's some suggestion of like that every Buddha that comes in has to have like 2 principal disciples as well. That is kind of suggested in this, seems to be suggested in this discourse.
That's what the Buddha is saying here. If this discourse is true, that each of the previous Buddhas before him had 2 primary students, but whether there were or weren't, that's not something we can confirm, and it's not going to change anything about eliminating your discontentedness, whether those things are true or false.
Okay, thank you.
You're welcome. All right, looks like Samantha. Go ahead, ma'am.
Thank you, Teacher David. My question is, how is this discourse different than the question that Vibhav asked on the last one about, or maybe it was a couple ago, about whether to interpret these readings as truth or as analogy, just as an example. So it sounds like you said that you had some concerns or didn't really know for sure or believe that, the lifespans were 40,000 years. And yet he said it in this discourse. And so from your previous answer, it seems like it should be something that the Buddha had either verified himself or seen himself. I just don't understand how we can tell where some things might be true and might not be true. I understand I don't need it necessarily to become enlightened, but just how to tell when something is being used as an example versus something that's truth.
Sure. So the way that I've gotten to these conclusions that I share with you guys is like the previous one where we're talking about the 4 great oceans and the water equaling the mother's milk or the blood in each individual being. When I observed past lives, there was just countless animal existences. So I can see very clearly how that particular discourse is true. And the Buddha is indeed talking about things that are related to the truth in terms of what is actually truly existing. And as I read through that discourse, there's nothing based on my personal experiences and direct experiences that I had that appears that there could be something that's off, right? And I've been able to independently verify each individual aspect of that. Where something like this, where people are being reportedly saying that that the Buddha is reported to have said that beings live for a lifespan of 40,000 years. I don't know of any human being that's capable of that. And then we've got the discussion of other Buddhas prior to the Buddha, which is also in conflict with another discourse. So we've got like 2 or 3 things here that aren't looking like they're matching up with what we already know and what we already understand in terms of what we've seen in other discourses and what we can independently verify. So that's where when you start seeing multiple points where it's like, oh, can't verify that, that's in conflict with that, then you can start easily seeing how things are mounting up that we can't really confirm these kinds of things that the Buddha's potentially talking about here. We don't know that the Buddha said this, but we don't know that he didn't say it either, right? Like we weren't there in this particular life because it was 2,500 years ago. But with your own direct experience of what you've experienced, then you can confirm it. So that's why the previous one, I could tell Vibhav, oh yeah, this is true based on my experiences. But this one, I have had no experiences where I've seen that human beings would last and be able to live for this amount of time of 40,000 years. And there's no evidence that I have that there were Buddhas before Gautama Buddha. We don't have any even light remnants of what they potentially taught and what time frame they lived in or anything like that. And then we've got this discourse where the Buddha is saying that he was the discoverer, the declarer, the originator of the path to enlightenment, undeclared before him. And then what we know about humanity is we know that humanity's ability to talk and have intellectual conversation didn't really evolve until just prior to the Buddha anyway. So you kind of look at the totality of the evidence here, almost like a scientist, and then you can look at it and you can cut through any impermanence that may or may not exist. And then you'd like to also be able to sort out, well, what's really needed to eliminate the discontentedness here? And in a discourse like this, what's needed is to be able to not cling or crave, to know when things started, the beginning of the cycle of rebirth, and also to understand impermanence, that things are constantly changing. So those are two things that we can pull out and we can say, oh, this can be beneficial for us to be able to experience enlightenment. And then the previous discourse, we're understanding there's countless rebirths, where that's going to help you, which I know is going to help you because it helped me, is that when I experienced what I experienced, having seen countless rebirths, then later coming across the teachings of the Buddha and seeing that he taught this, it made complete sense to me. Because I started having all these experiences before I ever studied the teachings of the Buddha in written form like this. I started having all these different experiences and I didn't understand them. And then when I started reading the teachings of the Buddha, I was like, oh, this makes complete sense to me because that's exactly what I experienced. So I can share with you that I've had those experiences and that this is how I've independently verified it. And that would be a way for you to be able to cut through it, not just through observing past lives, but being able to see the totality of the evidence of what is it leaning towards. And there's 2 or 3 things in here potentially that are leaning towards, maybe the Buddha didn't say this, but even if he did, we can't confirm that he did, but even if he did, we still have those teachings that we can use within a discourse like this to help us. And even if he didn't say this discourse, there's still teachings in here that can help you. Okay, let me see if we have any other questions. I don't see any other questions anywhere. Okay. And by the way, Samantha, just adding to what I just shared, is this is one of the reasons why it's helpful to work with someone who's, on the path, or if you feel like they've progressed to a certain point, because they will be able to tell you exactly how they've used each individual discourse and how it's benefited them and what they saw the improvement to their mind based on that particular discourse. That's another way to get help from somebody. Okay, so now we're at chapter 117. Is there someone who would like to read this one? Okay, it looks like Chris. Go ahead, sir.
Conditioned objects are impermanent. Monks, conditioned objects are impermanent. Conditioned objects are unstable. Conditioned objects are unreliable. It is enough to become dissatisfied with all conditioned objects, enough to become free from strong feelings towards them, enough to be liberated from them. Monks, Sineru, the king of mountains, is 84,000 yojanas in length and 84,000 yojanas in width. It is submerged 84,000 yojanas in the great ocean and rises up to 84,000 yojanas above the great ocean. There comes a time, monks, when rain does not fall for many years, for many hundreds of years, for many thousands of years, for many hundreds of thousands of years. When rain does not fall, seed life and vegetation, medicinal plants, grasses, and great giant trees of the forest wither and dry up and no longer exist. So impermanent are conditioned objects, so unstable, so unreliable. It is enough to become dissatisfied with all conditioned objects, enough to become free from strong feelings towards them, enough to be liberated from them. There comes a time when, after a long time, a second sun appears. With the appearance of the second sun, The small rivers and lakes dry up and evaporate and no longer exist. So impermanent are conditioned objects, so unstable, so unreliable. It is enough to become dissatisfied with all conditioned objects, enough to become free from strong feelings towards them, enough to be liberated from them. There comes a time, monks, when after a long time a third sun appears. With the appearance of the third sun, the great rivers, the Ganges, the Yamuna, the Akiravati, the Sarabu, and the Mahi dry up and evaporate and no longer exist. So impermanent are conditioned objects, so unstable, so unreliable. It is enough to become dissatisfied with all conditioned objects, enough to become free from strong feelings towards them, enough to be liberated from them. There comes a time when, after a long time, a fourth sun appears. With the appearance of the fourth sun, the great lakes from which those great rivers originate, Anuttara, Sihapada, Rathakara, Kanamunda, Kunala, Chandara, and Mandakini, dry up and evaporate and no longer exist. So impermanent are conditioned objects, so unstable, so unreliable. It is enough to become free, dissatisfied with all conditioned objects, enough to become free from strong feelings towards them, enough to be liberated from them. There comes a time when, after a long time, a fifth sun appears. With the appearance of the fifth sun, the waters in the great ocean sink by 100 yojanas, 200, 300, 400, 500, 600, 700 yojanas. The water left in the great ocean stands at the height of 7 palm trees, at the height of 6 palm trees, 5 palm trees, 4 palm trees, 3, 2, a mere palm tree. The water left in the great ocean stands at the height of 7 fathoms, 6 fathoms, 5 fathoms, 4 fathoms, 3, 2, and a fathom. Half a fathom, up to a waist, up to the knees, up to the ankles. Just as in the autumn, when thick drops of rain are pouring down, the waters stand in the hoof prints of cattle here and there. So the water left in the great ocean will stand here and there in pools, the size of hoof prints of cattle. With the appearance of the fifth sun, the water left in the great ocean is not enough even to reach the joints of one's fingers. So impermanent are conditioned objects, so unstable, so unreliable. It is enough to become dissatisfied with all conditioned objects, enough to become free from strong feelings toward them, enough to be liberated from them. There comes a time when, after a long time, a sixth sun appears. With the appearance of the sixth sun, this great earth and Seneru, the king of mountains, smoke, fume, and smolder. Just as a potter's fire, when kindled, first smokes, fumes, and smolders, so with the appearance of the sixth sun, this great earth and Seneru, the king of mountains, smoke, fume, and smolder. So impermanent are conditioned objects, so unstable, so unreliable. It is enough to become dissatisfied with all conditioned objects, enough to become free from strong feelings towards them, enough to be liberated from them. There comes a time when, after a long time, a seventh sun appears. With the appearance of the seventh sun, this great earth and Seneru, the king of mountains, burst into flames, blaze up brightly, and become one mass of flame. As the great earth and Seneru are blazing and burning, the flame, cast up by the wind, rises even to the Brahma world. As Seneru is blazing and burning, as it is undergoing destruction and being overcome by a great mass of heat, mountain peaks of 100 yojanas disintegrate. Mountain peaks of 200 yojanas, 300, 400, 500, all disintegrate. When this great earth and Seneru, the king of mountains, are blazing and burning, neither ashes nor soot are seen. Just as when ghee or oil are blazing and burning, neither ashes nor soot are seen. So it is when this great earth and Seneru, the king of mountains, are blazing and burning. So impermanent are conditioned objects, so unstable, so unreliable. It is enough to become dissatisfied with all conditioned objects, enough to become free from strong feelings towards them, enough to be liberated from them. Monks, who except those who have seen the truth would think or understand? This great earth and Suneru, the king of mountains, will burn up, be destroyed, and will no longer exist.
Okay, thank you, Chris. So this is another example of what Samantha was just asking me about and what Vibhav was asking me about certain things here, right? Like what we're seeing the Buddha talk about is this is essentially like a prophecy, talking about what's going to occur long in the future. And whenever you see those, whether it's from the Buddha or Jesus or anybody else, they're typically not 100% accurate. So what the Buddha is talking about here at the heart of this is change. He's talking about impermanence. One might also say that he's talking about climate change, that he's talking about the world heating up, right? He's talking about a second sun, a third sun, a fourth sun, a fifth sun, and so forth. He's talking about the world heating up. And the way that he's envisioning this occurring in his mind is he's envisioning more suns to make it hotter, right? Because he couldn't have thought about combustion engines producing CO2. He wouldn't have been able to think about our ozone layer deteriorating and the things that we now know through scientific discoveries that didn't exist during that time frame. He wouldn't have been able to think of those kinds of things because that wisdom didn't exist during his lifetime. And when you get to enlightenment, you fully understand the path to enlightenment. You have the wisdom of what it takes to get to enlightenment, but you don't know everything about everything, right? So the Buddha didn't understand quantum physics or even physics at all necessarily, because he had gotten to enlightenment. He understood the path to enlightenment, but he didn't understand the whole plethora of potential knowledge that could exist in the world and how that all comes together. That's separate from the path to enlightenment. So here we know that there hasn't been these multiple suns. And in order for a sun to be produced, we know because of solar systems and things that the Buddha didn't know during his lifetime, that would be nearly impossible for a new sun to be produced, right? Based on what we know about the solar systems. And the Buddha wouldn't have known these things. So this is where we can look at something like this and we can extrapolate that, okay, what he's talking about is the world heating up and the water receding, right? And then ultimately what he gets to is he's talking about all this climate change, in my opinion. He's talking about the earth changing and he's talking about all this impermanence. And these are things that people, or he's using landmarks that people would have understood at the time, right? And then ultimately what he follows this up with is he says, monks, who except those who have seen the truth would think or understand, right? He's saying, except those who understand the universal truth of impermanence, who could ever imagine that this great earth in Suneru, the king of mountains, will burn up, be destroyed, and will no longer exist? Because people who hadn't studied the path to enlightenment and didn't understand the universal truth of impermanence, who could ever imagine that this mountain would not exist? Because those other people would be craving permanence. They would be thinking about permanence. They couldn't imagine that this mountain is going to no longer exist someday. But for those that have seen the truth, those that have studied the teachings, who've independently verified the universal truth of impermanence, they would understand that kind of thing. And we might even say this today, like there's a lot of people in the world that crave for humanity to be permanent. They can't imagine a time when this planet won't have human beings. But who, except those who have seen the truth, would think or understand that at some point humanity will come to an end? Because we arose, we change, and we will fade away. That's what's going to happen. But people couldn't necessarily fathom that in today's world, because there's a lot of people holding on and be like, no, we can't do that. Like humanity has to stay and has to exist because the mind's craving permanence. But if you look at this objectively through the universal truth of impermanence, we know that humanity is not permanent. It can't be, right? So the Buddha is helping his students to understand the universal truth of impermanence, and he's using this prediction of what he can see in his mind, but he wouldn't be able to see clearly what the future would hold. So he's helping them to be able to see the universal truth of impermanence through things that he understood at the time, based on the world around him of what he understood. So let me know what questions you guys have here on this particular discourse. Okay, I don't see any questions anywhere. So let's go to the next one. Next one is chapter 118. Is there someone who would like to read this? Okay, it looks like Samantha. All right, ma'am. Oh, and then Terrence volunteered as well.
Oh, Terrence, would you like it?
Where did Terrence go? There he is. Okay. Just need to unmute yourself, Terrence.
Yeah, okay. I'll read it. Thank you, Samantha. Not understanding and not penetrating the Four Noble Truths. Monks, just as a stick thrown up into the air falls now on its bottom, now on its top, so too as beings roam and wander on, hindered by ignorance, unknowing of true reality, and fettered by craving. Now they go from this world to the other world. Now they come from the other world to this world. For what reason? Because they have not seen the Four Noble Truths. What for? The noble truth of discontentedness, the noble truth of the cause of discontentedness, the noble truth of the elimination of discontentedness, the noble truth of the way leading to the elimination of discontentedness. Therefore, monks, an effort should be made to understand this is discontentedness. An effort should be made to understand this is the cause of discontentedness. An effort should be made to understand this is the elimination of discontentedness. An effort should be made to understand this is the way leading to the elimination of discontentedness. Monks, it is because of not understanding and not penetrating the Four Noble Truths that you and I have roamed and wandered through this long course of the cycle of rebirth. What for? It is, monks, because of not understanding and not penetrating the noble truth of discontentedness, the noble truth of the cause of discontentedness, the noble truth of the elimination of discontentedness, the noble truth of the way leading to the elimination of discontentedness, that you and I have roamed and wandered through this long course of the cycle of rebirth. That noble truth of discontentedness, monks, has been understood and penetrated. That noble truth of the cause of discontentedness has been understood and penetrated. That noble truth of the elimination of discontentedness has been understood and penetrated. That noble truth of the way leading to the elimination of discontentedness has been understood and penetrated. Craving for existence has been cut off. The conduit to existence has been destroyed. Now there is no more renewed existence.
Okay, thank you, sir. So here we're getting some of the same things that we've been studying in this particular series of discourses, where he's giving us this analogy once again about throwing the stick and how it's ignorance that's leading to craving, and this is keeping the mind continually being reborn over and over in the cycle of rebirth. Well, why is that occurring? Because of the ignorance. Ignorance of what? The Four Noble Truths, because that's the very first teaching to get onto the path to enlightenment. If someone has a lack of wisdom of the Four Noble Truths, then they're going to have a lack of wisdom of all the other teachings that are going to lead to liberation of the mind and getting to enlightenment. So that's why the Buddha will typically point to the very beginning of the path. It's kind of like a trail marker, right? If you were going to take a hiking trip on this little trail, maybe a 4 or 5 mile or kilometer trail, there's usually a trailhead at the beginning of that, and it's helping you to know what this trail is going to encounter as you journey on this particular trail. Well, the Four Noble Truths is that trail marker, so he's going to tend to point to that when he's talking about this unknowing of true reality. That's what beings are not understanding, and it's when you penetrate that now you can actually escape the cycle of rebirth. But because beings do not know and understand, and they haven't penetrated into the Four Noble Truths, that's why we've been roaming and wandering through the cycle of rebirth. And that's why it's so important to be able to get on the path to enlightenment, is to be able to start with the Four Noble Truths. And now through penetrating with the Four Noble Truths, that's what's ultimately going to lead to the elimination of discontentedness. And what that's going to incur is the elimination of craving. And by eliminating that longing, yearning, wanting things to be a certain way, by cutting that off, you will eliminate your discontentedness. But also by doing that, you will cut off the conduit that is leading to this continued rebirth, this continued existence. Because like I was mentioning before, it's like a 2-for-1 special, right? If you eliminate the craving, desires, attachments, the longing, the yearning, you'll see your discontentedness gradually diminishing in this life. And once you independently verify dependent origination, then you'll be able to see that having eliminated discontentedness, you have eliminated the cause and condition that's producing rebirth as well. And this is how you'll know that you've accomplished that you'll see that for 1 year, 2 years, 3 years, the mind's completely peaceful and joyful, and you'll have confidence that your mind is experiencing enlightenment, and you'll know that there's no more for this state of existence. There's no more renewed existence because you've destroyed the conduit. What a conduit is like if you had electric, the cable between the 2 points, that's the conduit. That's what's allowing the electric to go from one location to the next. So craving is the conduit that allows the continued existence. So when you cut that off, when you eliminate the craving, there's no more conduit to allow the creation of a new mind and a new existence. So let me know what questions you guys have on this chapter. You can put that into Facebook, YouTube, or Zoom, or you can raise your hand in Zoom and ask any questions that you like. Okay. See your hands up, Terrence. Is that a question or is that from reading before? No, it's from reading? Okay. I'll go to the next one. All right. So now we're going to the subsection of this book, volume 11, which is a category of discourses related to enlightenment itself, or Nibbana. So this is chapter 119. Would somebody like to read this one? Maybe Samantha, were you interested in reading this one since you volunteered last time? Or Vibhav? Okay, well, go ahead, Vibhav.
A simile of Nibbana, enlightenment. Sariputta, I understand Nibbana, enlightenment, and the path and way leading to a Nibbana, enlightenment. And I also understand how one who has entered this path will, by realizing for himself direct knowledge experience, here and now enter upon and reside in the liberation of mind and liberation by wisdom that are taintless, with the destruction of the taints, fetters. Suppose there were a pond with clean, agreeable, cool water, transparent with smooth banks, delightful and nearby a dense wood, and then a man scorched and exhausted by hot weather, weary, parched, and thirsty, came by a path going in one way only towards that same pond. Then a man with a good sight on seeing him would say, this person so behaves, so conducts himself, has taken such a path, that he will come to this same pond, and then later on see that he has plunged into the pond, bathed, drunk, and relieved all his distress, fatigue, and fever, and has come out again and is sitting or lying in the woods experiencing exclusively peaceful feelings. So too, by encompassing mind with mind, I understand a certain person thus. This person so behaves, so conducts himself, has taken such a path that by realizing for himself, with direct knowledge, experience, he here and now will enter upon and reside in the liberation of mind and liberation by wisdom that are taintless and with the destruction of the taints. And then later now on, I see that by realizing for himself with direct knowledge, experience, he here and now enters upon and resides in the liberation of mind by wisdom that are taintless and with the destruction of taints, and is experiencing exclusively peaceful feelings.
Okay. Yeah, thank you, Vibhav. So this is a short discourse, but it helps you to confirm a couple of things. Because depending on what you've heard and what you've studied other places, you might be getting contradictory information. Sometimes people say that the Buddha never described what enlightenment is and that it's impossible to describe enlightenment. This isn't actually true. That's true for someone who hasn't experienced enlightenment, that they're not going to be able to explain what enlightenment is. But for the Buddha, he was experiencing enlightenment, so he knew exactly what it was, and he could describe it exactly. But today, with so much misinformation in the world, you'll hear people that will say that enlightenment is undescribable, that it's not possible to describe it. And then oftentimes people don't understand how to actually attain it. But this particular discourse helps you to be able to see just a little glimpse of what enlightenment is and how to actually attain it. Where there's other discourses, of course, where he goes into more detail about what enlightenment is and how to attain it. This is a short little discourse that gives you a little bit of indication to some of these things, where he talks about this liberation by wisdom, right? Liberation is freedom of mind, right? And that needs to accomplish through the cultivation of wisdom. This is something that you guys have already learned many times. If you've taken classes with me from the very first class you probably ever took with me, I was explaining how it's wisdom that leads to enlightenment. Well, here you can see it in the words of the Buddha. Also, you can see where he talks about this taintless mind, this destruction of the taints. Those are the 10 fetters, the pollutions of the mind. He talks about eliminating and purifying those from the mind. He talks about it in more detail in other discourses, but here he's kind of talking about it as well. So you can understand that getting to enlightenment involves the purification of the mind and uprooting these pollutions out of the mind. And you need the wisdom of what those fetters are in order to be able to accomplish that. So that's why you're learning and being able to understand what those fetters are. He goes into this analogy about someone who's very thirsty, and they basically relieve themselves by getting into this pool of water, or this body of water, this pond, and then by the time they're done, they're experiencing exclusively peaceful feelings. But then he also connects this to getting to enlightenment as well, that when you train your mind and you've uprooted the pollutions by training your mind to cultivate wisdom and then apply the training to destroy the pollutions of mind, by the time you get to enlightenment, you're experiencing exclusively peaceful feelings. This is also something you guys would have heard from me from your very first classes, where I talk about how enlightenment is where the mind's completely peaceful, calm, serene, and content with joy, that there's no discontentedness in the mind whatsoever. So here the Buddha is talking about this in just a very basic general sense, but other discourses he goes into it in more detail. And if you put all these things together, you start to paint a very clear picture of what enlightenment is and what enlightenment is not. And you start to understand what it takes to be able to get to enlightenment, which is the purification of the mind, of the pollutions of the mind, the 10 fetters. And then if you apply the training to be able to do that, that's where you then start to experience, slowly but surely, the arising of more and more peacefulness in the mind. So let me know what questions you guys have here. You can put that into Facebook, YouTube, or Zoom, or you can raise your hand in Zoom and ask any questions that you like. So it looks like Samantha has a question. Go ahead, Samantha.
Thank you, Teacher David. So in this discourse, you said that Buddha was describing what enlightenment is like. So and then you alluded to him having further teachings describing it. So, in other religions, let's say Christianity, heaven is oftentimes thought of as this, idyllic place with flowers, trees, waterfalls, everything's beautiful and whatnot. And it seems to be more of a like a physical destination, if you will, that people are aiming towards, as well as a peaceful one. Whereas enlightenment seems to be more of a cerebral destination versus a physical one, or seeing something physical. Is that correct? Or have we just not gotten to some other teachings of the Buddha where he might describe more environmental surroundings?
No, that's pretty accurate, that it's all about the mind. And it doesn't matter where the mind is, whether you're in Thailand or the USA or anywhere in between. If your mind is enlightened, you will be experiencing that peace and joy no matter where you're at. There's nothing that can shake up the mind at that point. So it's not a physical destination. It's what the mind is able to experience as a result of being purified and removing all those pollutions. I actually thought your question was going to be different, Samantha. I'm surprised maybe Vibhav's thinking about this one. Is this one right here? Because I explained to you guys that enlightenment is the peacefulness, the joy that you're experiencing is a mental quality, where here the translator has translated this to feelings, where the feelings are arising and changing, they're conditioned, where the mental qualities that you're experiencing in the enlightened mental state, they're a permanent mental quality that's always present, where a feeling arises, changes, and fades away. So I'm going to look back at this when we're done with class. This should really be experiencing exclusively peaceful mental qualities. That's really what this should be saying here, because an enlightened being isn't going to experience the arising and changing and fading away, which is what a feeling does. But yeah, it's a mental state, Samantha. It's not a physical destination.
Okay, thank you.
Mm-hmm. Vibhav, are you going to ask this question?
I actually assume this is mental state, but I should be paying more attention to the feelings, but I didn't.
Yeah. That's usually a Vibhav question.
Yeah.
All right. Let me see.
I have other questions on some of the other ones I can ask you later.
Oh, okay. Okay. I don't see any other questions anywhere. So now we'll go to the very last one. Is there someone who would like to read this? Okay. Looks like Chris or Samantha. It looks like Chris. Go ahead, sir.
An untaught ordinary person. Hear, monks, an untaught ordinary person who has no regard for noble ones and is unskilled and undisciplined in their teachings, who has no regard for true men and is unskilled and undisciplined in their teachings, perceives earth as earth. Having perceived earth as earth, he conceives himself as earth. He conceives himself in earth. He conceives himself apart from earth. He conceives earth to be mine. He excites in earth. Why is that? Because he has not fully understood it, I say. He perceives water as water. Having perceived water as water, he conceives himself as water. He conceives himself in water. He conceives himself apart from water. He conceives water to be mine. He excites in water. Why is that? Because he has not fully understood it, I say. He perceives fire as fire. He perceives wind as wind. He perceives beings as beings. He perceives gods as gods. He perceives Pajapati as Pajapati. He perceives Brahma as Brahma. He perceives the gods of streaming radiance as the gods of streaming radiance. He perceives the gods of refulgent glory as the gods of refulgent glory. He perceives the gods of great fruit as the gods of great fruit. He perceives the overlord as the overlord. He perceives the base of infinite space as the base of infinite space. He perceives the base of infinite consciousness as the base of infinite consciousness. He perceives the base of nothingness as the base of nothingness. He perceives the base of neither perception nor non-perception as the base of neither perception nor non-perception. He perceives the seen as the seen. He perceives the heard as the heard. He perceives the sensed as the sensed. He perceives the recognized as the recognized. He perceives unity as unity. He perceives diversity as diversity. He perceives all as all. He perceives Nibbana as Nibbana. Having perceived Nibbana as Nibbana, he conceives himself as Nibbana. He conceives himself in Nibbana. He conceives himself apart from Nibbana. He conceives Nibbana to be mine. He excites in Nibbana. Why is that? Because he has not fully understood it, I say.
Okay, thank you, Chris. So here, let's start up here before we go down further. What the Buddha is talking about is someone who's untrained, that they haven't studied the teachings, meaning they're not on the path to enlightenment. This is a non-practitioner. And they have no regard for the noble ones, meaning the people who have actually studied the teachings and that are wise in the teachings. They basically kind of dismiss them, right? As like, they don't know what they're talking about. And this person is unskilled and undisciplined, right? So meaning that they don't have control of their mind. So their mind would be unconcentrated and lacking focus and concentration, who has no regard for true men, which would be people who are wise and understand the teachings very well, and is unskilled and undisciplined in their teachings, perceives earth as earth. Okay, so now this individual who doesn't understand the path to enlightenment, this person perceives things in this way. Essentially, what the Buddha is talking about is this earth is mine, right? And they excite in the earth. Wow, look how beautiful the world is. Oh my gosh, I'm so excited. Well, why is it that they think the earth is theirs? And why is it that they become discontent based on the condition of just seeing the earth? Well, because they haven't understood, right? They don't have the wisdom of the universal truth of impermanence. They don't understand craving and what that does for the mind. And now if you get so excited about this scenery that you're seeing of the earth, well, when you have to get on the bus and leave, of course, they didn't have buses back then, but you get on the bus and you have to leave. It's like, oh, I don't want to leave. Oh, it's so beautiful here, right? So an individual who doesn't understand as it truly is and understanding the wisdom of these teachings, they're going to have these complications, right? And it's the same thing. The Buddha's going through all these different things with the various elements and then these different beings, and then ultimately getting to Nibbana itself. essentially what the Buddha is saying is an untaught person isn't going to understand enlightenment. They're not going to understand what it is, right? And ultimately he uses the same analogy of this is mine, and he excites in Nibbana, right? Essentially, I am enlightened. That's the whole idea, that someone who's untaught and untrained, they might think that I am enlightened. Well, if you're enlightened, there is no I. That's personal existence view. So how could you be enlightened if your mind still thinks I am enlightened? It's not I that is enlightened. It's the mind that is experiencing enlightenment. So in order to be able to experience enlightenment, an individual needs to be able to understand these natural laws and be able to understand the way to enlightenment in order to be able to experience it. So the Buddha is helping you to be able to see that in this whole series of statements here that he's describing. So any questions here on this particular discourse? No questions, huh? Okay, I don't see anywhere else either. Okay. Well, I'm just going to end class here by thanking all of you guys. Thank you for reading. Thank you for your questions. Thank you for even just participating in the class. It's nice to have you guys join. Next week, we're going to be in the next 10 chapters, which is chapters 121 to 130. We're actually getting ready to come to the end of this book. We've been in this book for a long time. I think it goes up to like 150 some odd chapters, maybe 153 or something like that. So we've only got another few weeks that we're going to be in this book. And then we're going to move into volume 12 to be able to study that one. So thank you all for joining for this particular class. And if you'd like to read ahead for the next set of chapters, you're more than welcome to do that, because that's going to help you prepare, because you've got the words of the Buddha, you've got words from me to be able to help you. And then, of course, you've got the references to go back and do any investigation if you'd like to do that at all. Tomorrow in our group learning program, we're going to be in chapter 9 of our first book, Developing a Life Practice, The Path That Leads to Enlightenment. Chapter 9 is What is Kama and How Does It Affect Me? This is where I'm going to teach the 4 types of kama and how to extinguish all your unwholesome kama. Because by the time you get to enlightenment, you'll only be experiencing wholesome kama. So you need to understand the 4 types of kama to be able to understand how to extinguish your unwholesome kama and get to a point where you're only experiencing wholesome kama. And then on Monday, I'm going to be starting a Foundation in the Path to Enlightenment course here in Chiang Mai, which is the 5-day, Monday through Friday from 9 a.m. to 3 p.m. So I'll have that going on. I'll be live streaming that one as well. So thank you all for joining, and perhaps I'll see you guys in a future class. Be well and take care. Sawadee ka.
Thank you again for watching. Enjoy your meditation. Look forward to seeing you online and answering any questions that you might have. Thank you so much.